Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Bluetongue virus update and Q&A session. So today is an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have regarding BTV3 live on today's webinar. My name is Amey Brassington, and I'm going to be your chair for this evening. I am Senior Animal Health and Welfare Scientist at AHDB. This session is brought to you by AHDB and all of the industry partners on the screen. So just to cover off a few housekeeping things before we begin the webinar. So this webinar is being recorded and the link will be circulated within 24 hours. It'll also be uploaded onto YouTube so that the link can be shared with anyone that you feel would like to watch this webinar again. If you do encounter any technical difficulties during today's webinar, please use your question box to ask for help, and we will do our best to help you. If you do unfortunately get kicked out of the webinar or have any difficulties hearing the content at all, please know that the recording is being shared within 24 hours, so you should be able to watch it back if you can't listen live. You will hear an update from our speakers first, and then there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. There'll be plenty of time for those questions, so please do enter them into the chat box at the top of your screen, the right-hand side. There's a speech bubble with a question mark in it. At the end of the webinar, there'll also be an opportunity to complete a feedback form. We do really appreciate any constructive criticism that you do have and any suggestions of specific topics that you'd like to hear in the future. I'd also like to draw your attention to the Bluetongue Resource Hub. So the Ruminant Health and Welfare website is your go-to for any information on Bluetongue. It's regularly updated with the latest Bluetongue information on behalf of the industry. And you'll find the latest news, photos of clinical signs, flyers that you can download and print, FAQs that have come up on previous webinars before. All of that's on there. So the URL and the QR code are on the screen now if you'd like to use those. There is also a Bluetongue hotline available, which is powered by AHDB, and this is open between the hours of 9 AM and 5 PM, and the phone number is on your screen now. Please phone this number for support with any questions that you have. And you can also find the latest information on Bluetongue on the government website and the AHDB website. If you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to APHA disease alerts to receive an email or text alerts. And if we move on to the next slide, please, Anna, the URL and QR code for this will be on your screen. And then on to the next slide again, please, Anna. The final thing from me before we hear from our speakers today is that there is an industry-led survey taking place at the moment, and this is aiming to find out what the impact of Bluetongue is in the UK this year. And this survey is being created just to enable us to really understand what you're all going through at the moment. We know that it's such a tough time for you all, and we are here to support you. So this information will hopefully help us to do that. It takes less than 5 minutes to complete and is completely anonymous. So we would really appreciate if anybody out there can complete that survey so we can get a better understanding. So I'm conscious that you'll all have lots of questions for us to get through today. So we'll just move on to a quick update from our speakers today. So we're delighted to be joined today by Gordon Hickman, who is the head of exotic disease control at Defra, and Rudolf Reichel, who is the small ruminant expert group lead at APHA. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Gordon, if you're there, Gordon.
Ooh, hope so. Good evening, everyone. I've not got any slides. Rudolf does have some that he's going to go through. So very quick update really from me. Latest situation that we've got 129 premises overall through England and Wales with one or more confirmed animal with Bluetongue 3. That's 127 in England and 2 in Wales. We did since we've last met, we have extended the restricted zone slightly, and that now covers Nottinghamshire and part of Northamptonshire and part of Leicestershire, and that was because on that border of the zone, through that our surveillance activity, we detected another couple of positive farms, and in line with our policy of looking to contain disease in the east of the county. We just extended that zone so that it was at least 20 kilometres away from the existing cases. There's been a couple more cases that we've detected outside of the zone, and these are what we call high risk moves. So these were movements of what have subsequently transpired to be positive animals that moved from what is now the restriction zone or the restricted zone, but before it became a zone. So these were perfectly legal moves done in, generally speaking, in sort of mid to late August, and we've been following them up and detected some positive cases. In all of those cases, we've culled the animals concerned, those positive animals, and we'll just test the other animals on the farm. But we've decided that because there was good evidence that the animals moved there infected and so hadn't acquired disease locally, then there wasn't a need to put in place zones. And in terms of vaccination, I think we're aware that a number of premises have vaccinated, and if there's any questions on that, we can pick it up afterwards. But I think that's just a very quick update of the current situation, and I'll hand over to Rudolf for perhaps some of the clinical signs and an update. Thank you.
Over to you, Rudolf, please.
Yeah, sorry. Just can I share my screen? Has that worked?
We can't see your screen at the moment. No, I can just see you.
Doesn't
Are we
work as
able
it
to
normally
help
does.
Rudolf with that,
Oh, no, hang on. I'm getting there. Sorry. Just had to dial through the tabs. Does that work now?
That's it. We can see that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I can jump quickly past this next slide because Amey has already mentioned that about the website. So just a bit about the recap of the source and transmission of Bluetongue virus. Obviously, biological vectors, midges, play a key role in spreading the virus, and these vectors remain infective for their entire lifespan. So in the ruminant host, they don't, so less than 60 days, most prolonged period seen in cattle. There's no direct animal-to-animal spread except vertical, where you can get virus passing from the dam during pregnancy to the offspring. Long-range dispersal of infected midges is possible. They can fly themselves for a few kilometers, but obviously can be carried much further by the wind. That's why it can cross from Europe continent to us as it did. Then the other important aspect is imports and movements of infected live animals. So obviously where that is known, stringent controls are in place. And then I mentioned the vertical transmission, where during pregnancy the virus can pass to the fetus, and then you can get the birth of a viremic offspring, a lamb or calf, at a later stage. So germplasm can also play a small role in transmission, semen, ova, or embryos, but obviously it's an important route, and it can get the virus into a new area where it hasn't been before. So in that sense, it's important. And then also it can be spread through contaminated needles and other contaminated surgical equipment. So it's important to remember that during vaccination. So just the life cycle again, if we start here with the infected adult sheep, that's why it's got a blue face there, because it's got Bluetongue. If you then have an uninfected adult female midge biting this sheep, it picks up the virus, and the virus then goes through a replication process, which is the extrinsic incubation period, and it goes from 4 to 20 days, but that is temperature dependent. So the higher the temperature, the quicker that incubation period takes place, and the quicker the virus can be passed on to another susceptible sheep, which is what happens here. And then it can become viremic within 2 to 4 days, and the cycle repeats itself. obviously this is temperature dependent, and then the midge itself, it's seasonal and weather dependent as well. So the transmission is therefore strongly associated with seasonal changes and weather, and occurs when you've got peak midge numbers, so late summer, early autumn. And there's also certain periods of higher midge activity in May, and then again in September. And then per day, it's in dawn and dusk where you get higher activity as well. We mentioned that they can fly very well, and that the wind can disperse them over much longer distances. We mentioned the temperature effect obviously affects the activity of the adults and also the survivability. They can be active for as low as just above 4 degrees. So you really need a hard frost to kill them, and that's when we can move into what's called the low vector period, when there's no or very few midges present to actually spread the virus from to susceptible animals. So the extrinsic pathway where the virus develops in the midge, that tends to start to slow down and stop when it goes below 15 degrees. The problem is, if the midge is infected with the virus and it's still alive, if the temperature goes up again, then that viral replication can continue and it complete the cycle. And that can obviously happen if you've just got a few cold days and then it warm up again, or if the midge goes into a stable or a pen where it is warmer. And then we get the other thing that the virus can do, it can overwinter. So the one rule that we're aware of is the in utero or vertical infection from the dam to the fetus and then the birth of viremic offspring. There is possibly other mechanisms as well, but we've seen that with the recent outbreak in the Netherlands and Europe that this do take place. So over to the clinical signs, the incubation period we mentioned, and the clinical signs then is associated with the multiplication and damage of the virus in the lining of the blood vessels, which causes bleeding. Then you get lack of oxygen in the area, and all that result in inflammation, which is swelling and reddening and fluid accumulation. And then areas where you've got mechanical damage and abrasion, you're more likely to see these lesions such as the feet, the mouth, the eyes, and the teeth. So these are data from what we've seen in England here. So this is from the 24th of August to the 18th of September, where we had 76 animals on 20 premises with signs at the time of the report. So the average there of animals showing clinical signs was about 2%, but as always, some will be higher and some may have seen no clinical signs at the time of investigation. So the most common signs is malaise and lethargy, and then lameness is quite high in cattle. Red mucous membranes, conjunctivitis, oral ulceration, crusting on the lips and nose, and then a nasal discharge. But there's a long list of other things that's been noticed as well. I think the one thing to point out here is, which seems to be unusual with BTB3, that you get these eye lesions, swelling around the eye, and corneal lesions, which include edema and ulceration. So it may look like New Forest eye. And that hasn't been seen apparently with other Bluetongue strains. And then obviously milk drop can be the first thing you notice in dairy herds as well. So just some of the pictures that's available there on the drop box. That's a cow there. We see the reddening on the teats there. So obviously you have to be quite close to spot that. And then on the nose you see this reddening, almost like a nutmeg pattern, slight nasal discharge. Again, quite subtle. This is more pronounced, where you get this crusting and scab formation, reddening and ulceration. There, again, they're much slight, more smaller lesions in the nostrils and then also on the inside of the mouth. And again, they're on the hard palate and the salivation. And obviously, when you see that on its own, it may look quite similar to foot and mouth disease, which is another differential. So then that's the point. If you see these things, then please report them. Then the swelling of the feet and the redness, which go in coincide with the lameness as well in the animals. And as far as we know, it would generally be all 4 feet affected, but as always, because of maybe other concurrent illness or damage, one foot may be worse than another. So we go to sheep. We had 92 animals on 37 premises with clinical signs. The average there is a bit higher, it's 2.6%. Common signs: nasal discharge, again malaise or lethargy, hypersalivation, lameness, inappetence, oral ulceration, and pyrexia. But then again, there's a list of others as well, with a swollen muzzle and swollen head and foot pain, and then the crusting around the nostrils, breathing difficulties. Severely affected animals become recumbent, and then there's a coronitis as well on the coronary band, bleeding of lips, you can see abortions, and even mortality in severe cases. And it looks like those animals that show a number of clinical signs at the start tend to die, even if it's just a few. There's some of the affected animals there, recumbent, not willing to stand up or not able to stand up. We see there the salivation, the crusting and nasal discharge, also the swelling of the muzzle, again with this one. On the inside of the mouth, you can see the redness, slight ulceration on the dental pad, here on the tongue as well. So again, you need to examine them quite closely. And there's a few of the appearances of the nasal plane and the muzzle, the swelling, the crusting, the hypersalivation, and nasal discharge as well. So these are just some pictures from the Netherlands. Obviously, that's a much more severe case. It looks like a burnt muzzle with a redness and the ulceration. That's got a severely swollen face, and then quite pronounced coronitis that can eventually lead to the hoof sloughing off. And interesting, they reported this phenomenon where they see animals standing with their muzzle in the water trough, and you may think they're drinking, but if you look for a while, you realize they're not drinking, and either they're just keeping their mouth in the water to almost cool their mouth to give them some relief of the pain, or they are desperate to try and drink, but they can't because they've got damage in the esophagus as well. So differential diagnosis, unfortunately, there's quite a long list, and the first one there in blue is other notifiable diseases, which can look very similar. So if you see any of those lesions, then please consider reporting it, or at least first stop, discuss it with your private veterinarian to make sure you're not missing it. But there's also a long list of endemic diseases, ORF being a very common one that can, on the face of it, look very suspect for this Bluetongue. But there's other things like photosensitization, hemoncus, which you've seen a few cases this year, liver fluke, etc. And then obviously your foot problems, which can give lameness, can look very similar as well. Same in cattle, we've got those notifiable differentials, but then again, some common endemic conditions that can look very similar, including MCF and BVD mucosal disease. Just remember that if you have cases on the farm, your veterinarian can still visit and can treat animals, because some of the sick animals will require treatment, even if it is just to reduce the pain and give them some pain relief, but also to evaluate that. And there's published evidence there to show what can be effective and what can be done. So as Gordon mentioned, the latest situation was 129 confirmed premises. We haven't had any camelids or deer confirmed so far. Cases are detected through active surveillance or report of suspect disease, and then obviously there will be movement restrictions, and we mentioned the zones as well. So just to keep in mind, lessons from the Netherlands, these diseases can have quite a severe impact on livestock keepers and also on veterinarians, and there are support organizations available. We've got the Farming Community Network, one of them, for the farmers, and Vet Life for the veterinarians. They are there to contact and provide help. So I think Amey has mentioned this UK Farmers Survey, so I can jump further to that, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you both for that information. I think it's really valuable that we keep that information getting out there so that people can recognise what signs to look for in their animals. So we've had quite a few questions come in. If Gordon and Rudolf, you want to pop your cameras on, I'll start off with a question for Rudolf. So you mentioned about when the temperature drops, the spread of the virus might reduce. Are you seeing the number of new clinical cases slowing down now that the weather is getting a little bit cooler?
It was discussed at the core group meeting, so I think Gordon will know that more or better than I. But it looks like it, but it's maybe early days to be sure of a consistent trend.
Gordon, do you want to come in on that?
Struggling to get off mute. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It's not, maybe it's sort of just going up at the same sort of steady trend. It's not flattening out. What we tend to do is we tend to almost get little peaks and troughs. So, and I think sometimes that's around, time of week and, laboratory testing and things. So, at coming up to a weekend, perhaps, the lab will be able to test all of the samples in a day, and then perhaps over the weekend it slows down a bit. So it's too early to tell, I think, basically.
Okay, it's perhaps not cold enough quite yet. We need a good frost.
And of course we've got to remember that the clinical signs occur a few days after it's been bitten by the infected midge. So there's always going to be a 7 to 10 day lag behind midge activity anyway.
Yeah. Thank you. The next one's for Gordon. I think we've had this question before, but just wondering if there's an update. Is there a map showing where Bluetongue cases have been confirmed yet? So I know we discussed this for individual cases on farms.
We haven't yet published it. I know I promised that it'll happen soon, and it will happen soon, but no, we haven't yet published it.
Okay, so people can still access the interactive APHA map to see where the zones are and where the infected areas are, but not the individual cases just yet, but it'll be on its way soon, hopefully.
Yeah, and we're very mindful of that there are premises outside of zones, and what we don't want is any unintended consequences to those individuals who, through no fault of their own, it was a perfectly legal purchase, somehow get picked on because they're the only premises in an area. So we're just mindful of that.
Yeah. And continuing with the zones, so over the next 6 months, with midge activity potentially decreasing over the winter, will the zones be eliminated once the midge activity decreases? So will those zones be reduced or removed, do we think?
So we can't say that for sure, because I think it depends on what happens between now and the start of the seasonally vector low period. And we need to think about, the risk of overwintering. So Rudolf, has already explained that entire males, they can be infectious for a lot longer than just a normal animal in terms of its blood supply. So, these animals can be infected for 4 or 5 months, for example. So we've got to be careful not to let the cat out of the bag by releasing restrictions too soon. And the other thing is pregnant females, calves and lambs, if they're infected now, can be born infected when they're born. So that's a mechanism for overwintering. So we've just got to bear all of this in together in terms of how we take it forward.
Okay, thank you. And a question related to that is, if your tup has got Bluetongue, how long do you need to wait before putting him in with the ewes?
So the advice that we've had is, for as long as he's PCR positive, there is a risk that those ewes could become infected. Now, I think the closer you, the further away, the lower that risk becomes. But we can't say there is no risk for as long as, you know, that ram tests PCR positive, and that can be months.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to a couple of questions on vaccines. So a question here says, can a farmer purchase a vaccine now to be used at a later date for next season, or does it have to be used straight away? And should people be using the vaccine now?
I think you need to talk to your vet about that. I don't see any point in buying vaccine if you're not going to use it.
Okay. And somebody made a comment that it's taking quite a long time for vets to be able to get the Bluetongue vaccine. Do we know why that is? Is there a supply issue at all?
I'm not aware of a supply issue. If people want to email me separately to say what vaccine they're trying to get hold of, I haven't been made aware of supply issues.
Okay. Thank you. Somebody said that there are now processors cutting back the prices offered from Bluetongue areas. They are doing this because the process that's implemented at abattoirs is additional cost. How are we going to tackle this disparity in prices for those that are infected with Bluetongue versus those that aren't? Are you aware of any differences in those prices, and is there a way that we could tackle that?
So I think it's probably not for government on that one. It's disappointing if people are offering less money than animals are worth. The additional demands on abattoirs are really not significant, and they haven't changed now from 6 months ago. So we'd want to understand why those two-tier markets are being proposed. I mean, we'll talk to our market colleagues, but yeah, it's disappointing if people are doing that.
Yeah. We've had a question, so it's regarding the impact on farms that are infected premises and movements off of the farms. So there's an example of a farm who wants to move animals off, but a special license has been denied. They don't have space for all the extra animals, and they'd like to know if there's an exit plan and how that would be communicated. And they said that this is particularly important for those with store lambs, young calves, or replacements. So is there a strategy for that?
First, I'm surprised that a specific license has been declined. That's an unusual event. I don't know why that might be, but there will be a change within the next week whereby only positive animals will be restricted on affected farms. So anything that hasn't tested positive will be able to move under the normal general license or not at all.
Okay, so that's going to be more of an animal restriction than a farm restriction.
An animal restriction, not a farm restriction.
Okay, we'll wait for that to come available. And once it does, if you check on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website, we will be updating with the latest information on there. So you can either find it on the gov.uk website, or Ruminant Health and Welfare website will have that on there as soon as it becomes available. Is there any connection at all to Madevisner in sheep? That might be one for Rudolf.
Not that I'm aware of, no. I think the one thing to mention though is that if you have concurrent disease and you then get Bluetongue on top of that, then obviously you may see more severe disease. I don't think it would make them more susceptible, although I guess that is always possible if there's anything that causes immune suppression, so that they may be more susceptible to the virus. But it's not that I'm aware that there's published evidence on that. But definitely the concurrent diseases can make things worse. They've seen it in the Netherlands where they had a lot of concurrent pneumococcal cases, and that obviously increases the severity of what was seen.
Okay, thank you. What is the prognosis for animals showing clinical signs and the mortality rate? So I'm hoping that the survey that's going out is going to help us provide an answer to this. But Rudolf, do you have anything else to add to that? Do we know mortality rates at the moment?
We don't know the mortality rates, but sort of the bits of evidence coming in now is that where we see the more sort of signs of severe disease in sheep, with the swollen head and respiratory difficulties, those animals seem to can get quite severe and die. But so far, we're lucky there's only a few of those that's been seen. It seems if they show those sort of signs, then it's quite likely that they're going to succumb. And the other thing, which again we don't have enough numbers to be confident, but it appears that intact males or tups are overrepresented with clinical signs and severe illness.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any advice on pain relief in sheep? So is there anything other than painkillers and anti-inflammatory drugs that farmers can use to help their sheep? I know you mentioned that in practice article, but are you able to elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, because I'm not a practicing veterinarian on the farm, so I think they need to contact the veterinarian because there's obviously a lot of things you have to take into consideration, withdrawal periods and efficacy of what works and what can be given to what species. So, but as I said, the published evidence is out there, what has been tried and what worked in the Netherlands. So if they talk to their vet, then they could get the right guidance there.
Okay, and a link to that article is available on the AHDB website and the Ruminant Health and Welfare website, so you should be able to find that if anybody would like to read it. Are there any drug companies working on a preventative vaccine? Gordon, are you able to answer that one?
Sorry, there's just phone going in the background. I mean, I think all of the companies, when they developed these, were hoping that they were fully preventive. So I know that there are other companies working on vaccines, perhaps slightly different technologies, etc. So I think we'll have to wait and see. I'm not aware of any others come to market in Europe yet.
Okay, thank you. And because of the vertical transmission, are we likely to see outbreaks earlier next year? And will this lead to more severe symptoms, i.e. mortality rates, higher infection rates? So maybe in the spring next year, as we start to get the warmer temperatures, because of the vertical transmission at lambing time, will we see more cases?
I think, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to be 100% certain, but based on what's happened in Europe, I think overwintering is, one has to accept that it is going to be very likely. And because there's so much of the virus present in Europe, it can come across again as well. But obviously, if it overwinters here and it starts off earlier and we've got a warmer season, then potentially it can become worse than it was this year. But it's all seasonal and all weather dependent, really. Because the other thing is the life cycle of the midge itself. If it's warmer, they're more active and they complete their cycle quicker, and the virus replicates better. So you get more midges with more virus on board, and that's certainly what happened in Europe this summer. It was ideal conditions for that to take place, and that's probably why it was so severe there.
Thank you. There's a couple more questions on vaccines. So if a farmer's had Bluetongue 3 on their farm already, should they still consider vaccinating?
We know animals that got the disease will get good immunity, but as we've seen, when you go and test the whole herd, there's always some animals that didn't get it and didn't get exposed. And unless you go and test every single animal, you probably wouldn't know. But I think it's fair to assume there always will be some that hasn't got the disease and will still be susceptible. So I think it's one of those cases you just have to sit down and discuss with your vet and see what's the best situational disease or route for your the best route for your particular flock.
Okay, thank you. And is it worth vaccinating now if it takes 3 or 4 weeks for the vaccine to take effect when we're coming up to winter? So that's that question about the reduced virus available in the winter. Is it worth vaccinating now to protect the animals?
I think it's, again, one of those aspects you need to discuss with your private veterinarian, because every flock and every management situation is going to be different, and there's a number of things you have to take into consideration.
And another question on the vaccines. So is it safe to vaccinate animals in the last trimester of pregnancy?
Can't remember if they have published evidence for that at the moment. Just try and find that. And if you know, Gordon, or
I don't. I think that's again another one to discuss with your private vet. We have to remember that these are the dossier is relatively limited. I would be very surprised if they have evidence for these actual vaccines of vaccine use in the third trimester. So it'll be imputed from their other strains.
yeah.
I don't know if it's mentioned at all in any of the guidance notes.
I've just checked on the comparison sheet, which again is available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. They just say pregnancy. So it's, the first one says can be used during pregnancy. The second one can be used during pregnancy and ewes and cows. And the third one can be used in pregnancy. So that's the wording there.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for checking on that. So somebody said they're having difficulty finding the specific license for the vaccine. Where should they look, and what's the process for that? Gordon, I think that'll be one for you. Or Rudolf.
Yeah, I think there would be links available there, and I know people said that they had difficulty to follow the whole process. And I think Mandy from AHDB, working with some other people, has produced a one-page leaflet with a flow diagram to take you through the whole process. So I'm not quite sure where that is, but I think it would be available within a few days to hopefully make the steps you have to follow clearer, because it starts with the livestock owner that has to apply for the license and then go from there. But there's certain information you have to put into the correct form that you have to fill in, and that gets attached to your application to be processed.
Yes, it's a two-stage process. You have to fill in a template form with some information, and you then attach that document to your license application, which you make through the normal route. So I accept it's not as straightforward as a normal movement license where you just log into the APHA system, say I want to move from here to here. There's an additional upfront step that you have to fill in that template. We'll make sure that the links get sent round. And apologies, it's the licensing system was really designed for animal movements rather than for vaccination. So we've had to adapt the way it's done.
Okay, thank you both. So I think, as Rudolf mentioned, we've made a guidance document, and that will be available in the next few days on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. If you are struggling to find any movement licenses, just while we're on the theme of licenses, or want to know what license is required for the type of move that you're doing, if you go onto the Ruminant Health and Welfare website on the Bluetongue Hub, there is a drop-down table which has details of specific circumstances that you might be in and the type of license that you'll need to go and look for on the government website, and there are links on there to get to the government website to download those licenses or apply for those licenses. The next question is, we trade carry. Are we allowed to sell milking animals into or out of zones? So I guess this would be the same for any animals. It's the licenses that apply to any animals, aren't they, in the zones?
So it doesn't matter whether it's lactating or whatever. So you can buy them or sell them into the zone. but they can't come out of the zone to live unless they get a pre and a post movement test, and that's a specific license to move them out again.
Okay, thank you. Just looking to see if there's any more questions have come in. So another one on vaccination. So has any thought been given as to how vaccinated animals will be tracked for the 5 years that's legislated for? So I think this is about tracking after the vaccinations.
So we're not going to track them as such, but a requirement of the license is that you tell us that an individual animal has been vaccinated. So if ever we need to track it back for one reason or another, we'll be able to search for that individual unique ID, which is why they have to be unique IDs and not just a red stripe or whatever. So yeah, we don't have a national database, but we are asking for people to tell us the details.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions that we've had come in so far. So we are finished a little bit ahead of time. If anybody's got any last minute questions, I can ask those. We'll leave the questions open for a couple of minutes, but thank you both so much for answering all of those questions. Anybody else got any last minute ones to add in? I think there's one just come in. Are animals culled if the rest, if they are in a restricted zone? So I think the answer to that is no.
The answer to that is no. The only times we're culling is where the positive animal is outside of a zone and there is evidence that the animal moved infected, and so rather than put in place a zone, we'll be culling that animal and testing the other animals on that same premises. If we got infection in clean country, in a free area, again those animals would probably be culled, and then we'd put in place a temporary control zone, and then we'd start that sort of cycle that you've seen in the eastern counties and Humberside going forward again. So no is the straight answer. So there's no, your animals won't be culled if you report disease, if you're in a restricted zone.
Thank you. And another question is, what type of disinfectant is recommended for equipment, e.g. QAC? Are we able to comment on that one?
QAC, that's what was...
I'm not sure. So around types of disinfectants that are recommended, I don't know whether they maybe mean insecticides.
I just wondered if they mean insecticide, yeah. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think yes, normal biosecurity is sensible, but this is spread by biting midges and by vertical transmission and germinal products, so whatever normal disinfectant you use as part of your routine biosecurity, continue to use that at general orders rate. Insecticides, again, it really depends on why you're using insecticides. We shouldn't be sloshing insecticides around. They have limited value. For cases where we are requiring it as part of a license, there's some guidance on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website, but it's for flying insects, and we're only suggesting you apply it to the vehicle they're traveling in. We're not suggesting you apply it to the animal. So okay. Yeah, just a normal approved insecticide.
Okay, thank you. A question, will the vaccination results result in a false positive test later on? So I think this is, if you vaccinate your animals, will they test positive for Bluetongue?
So we're very confident that it won't. What it will mean, however, is that we won't be able to tell from looking at the antibodies whether that animal got those antibodies from the vaccine or from naturally acquired infection, but it won't generate a positive PCR result because these are inactivated vaccines. What we are saying is wait a week from between vaccination and testing to move out of the zone, because just occasionally there is a temporary sort of blip, but it's not a permanent blip, so it won't give you a false positive.
Okay, thank you. And it is just the serotype 3, the Bluetongue 3, that we're experiencing in the UK at the moment, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yep. What sheep mortality levels can we expect from the 2024 experience on the near continent? Rudolf, can you comment on the mortality levels that they had in the Netherlands and other countries, whether we're likely to experience similar?
Well, I guess one can guess, and we certainly hope not, because as we said, it's very much weather dependent, and how does it overwinter, and where does it start, and when does it start, and then what the weather is going to be like. And again, even in the Netherlands, where they've seen lots of cases, and in Germany, it's quite variable. So some farms or some flocks may have, like here, just a few individuals and nothing more, and they will recover. But then some have reported, severe disease and mortality, certainly in sheep, up to 50-60%. And we certainly hope we're not going to see that. But I think it's to keep that in mind, that it is possible. But there's, I guess, a lot of factors that we just don't know how it's going to play out.
Thank you. We have somebody here who's using artificial insemination. So they're saying, does the rise of Bluetongue 3 and the cold temperature of when midges are least active, is that relevant to when they need to consider about timing of artificial insemination? So is it better to do the artificial insemination when it's colder and there's less midge activity? Would that make a difference? Does it depend on their individual circumstances?
Yeah, and I think it's obviously more important when the semen is collected, because if that is during the risk period, that is what's the consideration. I guess it depends if they talk about using fresh semen or using frozen semen. But it is at the time when you're going to collect the semen, what is the risk period then?
Okay, thank you. And are we still offering, is Defra still offering free PCR tests? Somebody's asked if they're able to get free PCR tests for small sheep flocks.
So you can only get a free test if you're moving out of the zone. So if you're in a zone and you don't intend to move out of the zone, then there's no free testing. But if you've got a small flock and you wanted to move them, I don't know, from Hampshire into Dorset, then yes, free testing is available for that move. You'll have to get a license to move, but yes.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question, I think somebody may have missed the beginning, asking if we have any idea if zone constraints are in for weeks, months or years. I think at the moment we're not sure when those constraints will be lifted. The Defra are looking at doing restrictions on animals rather than at farm level in the coming weeks, hopefully.
Yeah, and a lot will depend on the spread of the disease between now and the start of that seasonal vector low period, whenever that is. And we should remember, last year it was very late. It was the 8th of January. The earliest it's ever been is the 14th of November. It's usually, back end of November into December when that period starts. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Rudolf, this might be one for you. Are there any breeds of sheep that are more susceptible to Bluetongue 3 than others?
Good question, but I don't think we've got the data to say that clearly yet.
Okay, thank you. Has there been any local spread of infection in the areas outside of the current restricted area? So, for example, the cases in Wales. Are we able to comment on the situation in Wales?
So we shouldn't really comment for Wales because we haven't got any Welsh government colleagues, but there has been no evidence of local transmission anywhere outside of the restricted zone.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we've had come in. Thank you very much. So if there are any other questions that you do have, please do send those in to us, and we will try to get answers up on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website on the Q&A section. You can find frequently asked questions on there. If you do have any questions, they may have already been answered. Anna, could we put up the last slide, please? Many thanks again to Rudolf and Gordon for joining us and giving us their time today to answer all those questions. I just wanted to highlight to you all that there is additional support available to you out there. So if you are struggling at this time, which we know a lot of you will be, there are resources available. So please do use those on the screen now. Thank you all for joining, and hopefully see you next week.
Thanks,
Thank
Amey.
you. Thanks, Amey, and thanks for your opportunity.